He stood up, adjusted his notes, cleared his throat, and began explaining the thing that would eventually save more than 200 million lives. Nobody in the room understood what he was trying to say. No tension, no urgency, no realization, just polite silence. That's not a tragedy. That's a system failing at the exact moment it mattered most. And the disturbing part, it almost stayed that way. Welcome to History AI. We don't talk about history, we decode it. Think about the last time you had an idea, a real one, the kind that felt obvious once you saw it, the kind that made you wonder why nobody else could see what was right in front of them. Now imagine that idea could save millions of lives, and the room still doesn't react. That happened. London, 1929, and for 11 years the world barely noticed what had been discovered. September 3rd, 1928, St. Mary's Hospital, London. Alexander Fleming returns from vacation in Scotland. His laboratory smells exactly the way laboratories always do. Dust, glass, chemicals, warm bacteria, growing quietly inside forgotten dishes. The room is cluttered, chaotic, the kind of place where important discoveries do not look important yet. Fleming begins sorting through petri dishes left sitting for weeks. Routine work, the kind scientists do half distracted, hands moving automatically, mind somewhere else. Then, one dish stops him. A mold contamination. Normally, you throw it away immediately, but Fleming pauses. He lifts the dish toward the light, and suddenly, something feels wrong, or rather, something feels impossible. Around the mold, the bacteria are gone, not weakened, not slowed, dead. A perfect circle surrounding the contamination. A silent, empty space where bacteria should still be alive. Most scientists would have discarded the dish without a second thought. Fleming kept looking. That decision changed history. Not dramatically, quietly. Because breakthroughs rarely announce themselves like movies. Most of them arrive looking accidental, unfinished, easy to ignore. Fleming named the substance penicillin, then spent months trying to understand what he had found, growing it, testing it, writing notes late into the evening while London moved normally outside the laboratory windows. And eventually, he stood in front of a room in 1929, trying to explain it. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because Fleming was brilliant at seeing patterns, but terrible at transmitting them. He mumbled, lost the thread of his own presentation, restarted explanations halfway through sentences. The room watched politely. Nobody interrupted. Nobody leaned forward. Nobody asked questions. And when the presentation ended, the room simply moved on. That moment may have cost millions of lives, not because the science failed, because the transfer failed. The paper was published later that year, technically precise, emotionally lifeless. It sat quietly inside journals while hospital beds kept filling. Blood poisoning, pneumonia, childbirth infections, meningitis, wounded soldiers surviving battlefields, only to die days later from bacteria doctors could not stop. The answer already existed. The world just couldn't feel its importance yet. That realization changes how you see civilization, because history is full of discoveries that were technically visible, but psychologically invisible. The system had encountered something extraordinary, and failed to emotionally recognize it. For 11 years, penicillin disappeared into silence. No conspiracy, no suppression, no dramatic rejection. Just a civilization quietly failing to understand what it was looking at. And that may be the most terrifying kind of failure, the invisible kind. Now this is where the story changes, because Fleming didn't save 200 million lives. He found the door. 3 other people forced it open, and almost nobody remembers their names. Oxford, 1939. Europe is moving toward war again. Inside a laboratory crowded with equipment and cigarette smoke, two scientists reopen Fleming's forgotten work. Howard Florey, an Australian pharmacologist obsessed with practical results, and Ernst Chain, a German-Jewish biochemist who had fled Nazi Germany carrying little more than his research. Together, they succeed where Fleming failed. They isolate penicillin, purify it, stabilize it, turn it into something that can survive inside the human body. Then comes the moment that changes everything. May 25, 1940. A laboratory mouse infected with lethal bacteria. The mouse receives penicillin. Nearby, another infected mouse receives nothing. Hours pass. The untreated mouse dies. The treated mouse lives. The room goes silent. Florey stares at the results for several seconds before speaking. It looks like a miracle. But it wasn't a miracle. That's the important part. It was a system finally learning how to recognize what had already been discovered 11 years earlier. And even then, there was still a problem. Fleming's original mold barely produced enough penicillin to matter. To treat one patient, laboratories needed enormous quantities of mold. To save millions, they needed mass production. Which is how this story somehow ends up in a fruit market in Illinois, with a woman carrying a shopping basket. Her name was Mary Hunt. Most people never hear it. History remembers Fleming. Sometimes Florey and Chain. Almost nobody remembers Mary Hunt. Her co-workers called her Moldy Mary, not affectionately, because she spent her days wandering through markets looking for rotten fruit, rotting vegetables, old bread, anything covered in unusual mold. Her colleagues thought she looked ridiculous. Mary Hunt kept searching anyway, and one afternoon in 1943, inside a market in Peoria, she found a cantaloupe covered in golden mold. That mold produced 200 times more penicillin than Fleming's original strain. 200 times. One woman carrying spoiled fruit through a laboratory helped unlock mass antibiotic production for the modern world. That's the real penicillin story. Not genius alone. Systems, persistence, transmission, adaptation, and people the world almost ignored. When AI analyzes the penicillin story, it doesn't primarily see medicine. It sees a transmission failure. A discovery entered the system successfully, but the meaning did not. Fleming recognized the pattern, but recognition alone changes nothing. Civilizations only transform when insight successfully transfers between human beings. AI would likely have identified the danger long before 1929 ended, not because it could predict the future, because the warning signs were already visible. Fleming's communication style, weak influence networks, technically strong research with low emotional impact. The signals existed. The system already showed signs of failing to recognize its own breakthrough. But this is where AI reaches its limit too. AI can detect patterns, pressure, communication bottlenecks, missed synchronization, but it cannot fully solve the oldest problem in civilization: the gap between seeing something and making another human mind truly feel its importance. That moment is still human, and history keeps changing inside that gap. This is the part that should disturb you most. Penicillin almost disappeared. Not because humanity rejected it, but because the room didn't emotionally understand what it was hearing. One presentation, one afternoon, one scientist unable to transfer urgency, and 11 years of silence followed. How many silences exist right now? Somewhere tonight, someone is standing in a conference room holding an idea that could change everything, and the room is not understanding it. Not because the idea is wrong, because the interface between the idea and the audience is failing. Every breakthrough you have never heard of is probably trapped inside a room exactly like that. waiting for someone who can translate vision into belief, waiting for its Flory, its Chain, its Mary Hunt. Someone stubborn enough to keep searching through the noise while everyone else walks past the answer. Fleming didn't save the world in 1928. He noticed something strange inside a forgotten dish. It took 11 more years, and people history barely remembers, to make the world finally understand what it was seeing. And somewhere tonight, something extraordinary is being ignored by a room that thinks it has already seen everything. In the next episode, a machine claiming the world was ending. One man alone in the middle of the night, forced to decide whether humanity was already at war. He had no proof, no confirmation, no time, only a quiet instinct that the system was wrong.